I thought it was really well done. I thought the questions at the beginning were very evocative and kind of made me really think about the fact that I ate at a desk here last night for dinner and had soup that was a day old rather than something fresh. I thought it was interesting that you were tackling the other problems, and I liked the images of the larger people and the showing the statistic. I did think you could potentially include that at the end as well, because your statistics were great, but it would have been nice to see it visually as well. I thought it was really good that you mentioned the shared knowledge, because I think that's a really important part of cooking and doing it together. And the final thing that really won me over, because initially I was like, I don't want to leave my house if I'm cooking. When you first said that, when you said about the high spec kitchen and how it would kind of become a different experience to cooking at home, where it would be more kind of high spec, I guess. That kind of won me over, because I was like, oh, okay, I can see myself using that, because it would be a different time to cooking at home, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I thought it was really good.
I'll echo that. I think the research was really, it was really thorough, and you expressed that. I mean, I know you had to read off notes, because remembering that sort of statistic is difficult. But I think illustrated how well researched it was, and how you branched off into all sorts of other areas about well-being and health and obesity and stuff. So the research was excellent. I'd question the use of damn. I struggle with slightly, and dinner at mine. It's not really dinner at mine. It's dinner in a. I thought the name Hubbard was fantastic. It was a really memorable and quite comical and warm and friendly word. So, I mean, maybe it's a small thing. I also thought that it really keyed into the units, the concept of the sharing economy. And your word making memories, I think, was a really pertinent one, that sharing cooking together is so much more than just feeding a daily need for calories. It's a really social event. And the aspirational, I think there's something really aspirational about your project too, that it's looking outside the box, it's questioning things and pushing the boundaries. And Megan's point about going to this place which has got the most fantastic facilities is great. Why wouldn't you want to go there? So I suppose the next step is where is it, and is it an urban solution? Is it something that is connecting to rural communities as well? I don't know where you're going with it.
As it was at the moment, it was going to be sort of situated to start off with, sort of in and around university halls and campuses and sort of business districts, but in the grand scheme of things, when everybody wants to cook there and no one wants a kitchen in their own house anymore, then they'll become a sort of an urban typology, and in rural areas as well. And there's a different, I didn't really, because of the length of the presentation, I couldn't talk about all the different things I want to do next semester. But one of the other is a network of different typologies. So there's the the space that I was talking about here, but there's also the producer micro warehouses, which will be more rural, coming into urban, where the foods are coming in from as well. But yeah.
I think actually just coming on from that, I know this isn't a criticism, because I know there's just limited time when you have such a broad project, it's hard to get everything in. But some kind of drawing of your system would have been really helpful for everyone to see, because actually I feel like you've told us a small part of what you're thinking about today. And I'm thinking really pragmatic questions. It's like, how many of these habitual spaces are there going to be, and this sort of thing. Megan's talking about convenience. How far away is it? How far do I have to walk? Are they all going to be, because you talked at the beginning about the different locations affecting how you experience your meal, are they all going to be slightly different designs to give a slightly different feel, or are they all going to be uniform? So they're kind of, and what happens if I get there and there are already people cooking and I can't use the space?
It's organised through the app.
So, okay, all right. So there are all these things, so you have all the answers, but they're just kind of questions that I kind of immediately think about. But it's like I said, it's complex, and so it's hard for you to get across. So if you can somehow, and I know you have the skills. We've seen so many of your drawings, and then you click on them, they tell you everything that's going on. So in a future presentation, if you can include that, it would be brilliant.
Mm-hmm. There was one really lovely drawing. I mean, it was a great presentation, but your hand drawing of the
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
and the different things happening. It was such a great drawing. So we've got more like that.
She has. Claire's done so much in that, and the problem was that it was only 15 minutes, and I think you've been selective. And there's a lot of new stuff in this which I enjoyed looking at, particularly the aspirational material. I was going to say, Joelle stole my thunder. to look at these drawings that you've done as a method as something that informs your design process, makes them really useful drawings in your design process, because it means that it's not just observational, it's observational then informative, because it's an analytical view of how we gather around a house and prepare a meal. You've got some wonderful material there. There's one question comes out of it for me. So you just said towards the end there, ideally we won't need kitchens in our house any longer, and that's a point that I take seriously and you should take seriously. I'm sure you do. So the question is, how many kitchens that we no longer require, as it were, how much sort of floor space does that add to a house? And therefore, there's a sort of a equivalence.
Yeah.
If 10 houses don't need a kitchen, that gives you 10 kitchen sizes of space, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you can begin to think about how things can work in that respect, or if it's 20 or whatever. So there's a sort of a currency of kitchens, which becomes your community kitchen, if I can call it, your Hubbard. So there's something in that. And finally, I feel very guilty because last night I bought pizzas for you tonight. I don't think you won't be able to eat them now. So I do apologise.
It's shared though, so it's okay. That's fine.
It's kind of there's a sort of a shift got to happen in society's approach to food, where it's not just about quick consumption to get nourishment. It's about social activity, and that's the strength of your project.
Sorry, can I just I want to reiterate, sorry Shahi, what Ronnie was saying, and Joelle actually, is that you sort of said, eventually imagine no one has a kitchen hammer. I feel like you just want to jump straight to that and kind of imagine that scenario, because that's when your architecture will start looking really interesting. And also, actually, that's why it's so valuable having someone who sees your project totally new and fresh. As Joelle makes such a good point about damn almost not being the appropriate name anymore. But your project has evolved, hasn't it? That's why. But that, if you think about any kind of startup company or anything, you navigate your way through and find out that what you're doing isn't necessarily what you thought it was at the beginning, and that's really normal. That's a normal process, but it might be necessary to rethink that, even though I do think the concept is cool.
I think excellent presentation, and the material, the research that you put together is very convincing. So if I understand it correctly, you're proposing that the kitchen is a building itself, right? It's a building that has a kitchen.
Yeah.
So it's a restaurant that you walk into, but you do it yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And because of this new typology, you're proposing that this will take out the kitchen aspect of your apartment.
Yeah, probably you still have a kettle for your cup of tea or whatever, but yeah, your meals would all take place there, and your dining space as well is transferred here. So either you can sort of increase urban density, which is kind of needed, or you really live a much more luxurious life than you did before because you've got all this extra space in your downstairs for entertainment. Oh, and you're lovely.
It's interesting in a sense, because that's the one part that I'm struggling to get convinced on. I lived in 2 houses ever since I moved here. The first one, we had no kitchen. We had to share a kitchen with other flatmates. But then as soon as we moved to another flat and we had our kitchen, I can't imagine going back to another flat that has no kitchen and I have to share again, because of the amount of time I spend in the kitchen. I come home from work and I start cooking, and then while it's cooking, I jump back and do more work on my computer. So I think that would be the aspect that I would be looking for in your project. It's a challenging one, but I think it's a really interesting problem that you've picked up. One with tons of potential.
I agree with you as well, for the record. I spend all my time in our kitchen because my room is so tidy, so that's my workplace, that's my social space, that's where I cook, that's where I do everything. So yeah, it'll be a challenge for me too, so maybe it's quite good.
That's a really good point. I have a really minor thing to say, is that you use lots of kind of stock images, and actually I know that you guys have shared loads of meals together, and when you're talking about having a really good time, I wonder whether some of those images might have actually, bearing in mind your audience, been more powerful.
Yeah.
The
That's
time
very-
lapses so good.
Yeah, it's a
There
very
are so
minor
many of
point,
them. Yeah.
but you had the images, I think. Does anyone else? Etienne?
Yeah, you don't think we are going to lose like the social aspect of a shared house with like moving out the kitchen, because like the kitchen is just another room where you can meet people without any plan, and with your project like you have to plan to go to this place, and so maybe we are losing a bit of spontaneity.
It's, yeah, yeah, no, it's true.
Good.
It is a good point. It is a good point. I think I'm quite lucky in the fact that I live in a house that those sort of spontaneous meetings are desired, and so we sort of do use our kitchen for that reason. But the space in the house will still be there, so it can just turn into a much larger, more comfortable place. You don't have to sit on a worktop; you can sit on a soft seat. But there are plenty of houses that I know, or even halls, where you live in a flat which is shared, but you never see your housemates. I lived in one last year, and so actually organising to meet someone, sort of a bit like what Eileen was talking about, you have to sort of get yourself out of that sort of insular environment in order to not feel lonely. So you do have
The aspirations you set for this new Hubbard, where there are three things you mentioned, which all allude to a high level of quality of provision, would make it attractive. And so what you're able to offer is far greater than what most individual houses can put together. And like you say, it frees up space in the house for other pleasurable activities.
I think just a point on Ronnie's comment. I agree with that. And the one image that came to my mind when you described this setting was MasterChef. When they announce the challenge and you see this clean kitchen tabletops with all this state-of-the-art equipment, and then they rush to the fridge and get a basket of all these fresh vegetables and all the ingredients, that's the kind of image I think that will be the selling point of your project. Definitely.
But also as well, kind of using it, I don't know if there's a kind of, with the Hubbard and the spare food around, is that not only do people kind of arrange, I'm sure you've thought about this, when they can use the space, but actually you might kind of fancy cooking for more people or cook more, and you can actually invite people. So you get home and you've had a tired day and someone at the space is inviting you to dinner and they're saying it's going to be ready at about 7. That's great. You can just go and share a meal with them. So there's a lot of opportunity for it.
One last point was I liked your reference to the RIBA kind of work. On a serious point, you also said about the ritual of, you had an image of hand washing, and that whole process from the beginning of the cooking process through to the end of it, and what happens, how that's manifested in spatially, and it is really interesting. I think that's a good starting point.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Freya.
No, thank you.